Hi, I'm Jessie Prey.
And I'm Andy Cassette. Welcome to Love Murder, where we unravel the darkest tales of romance turned deadly.
Our episodes are long-form, narrative-driven, and deeply researched, perfect for the true crime aficionados seeking stories beyond the headlines.
Like the chilling case of Blanche Taylor Moore, the so-called Black Widow who left a trail of poisoned lovers.
Or the shocking murders of Chad Shelton and Dwayne Johnson, where family ties masked a sinister plot.
Subscribe to Love Murder on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, Julia Cowley joins us to discuss the Terry Hobbs interview and to profile the killer in the West Memphis 3 case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my third wheel of a co-host, Alice.
Not even mad about it, because the real two wheels isn't even you and Julia, Brett. It's just Julia. It's just Julia.
It's a unicycle today.
You guys, we've been covering West Memphis 3 for approximately 3 years at this point. And since day one, you guys have asked for the Consul Julia Callie, FBI, BAU, special agents thoughts. And finally, we've convinced her to come on here.
It was so hard. Julia's the best.
I'm always happy to join you.
And you're so giving with your time. And it's amazing.
I'm
we
retired.
Appreciate it. That's what you were saying earlier.
You're
Yes,
retired
I'm
from
retired.
You're retired from one job and full time in another. And the thing we have to give you a little background on, obviously you've heard now our interview with Terry Hobbs, but Julia is such a professional. She will never brag on herself. But when we were prepping, you always prep to make sure that you have the right facts. You're all on the same page before you talk to any witness. This is how we run our investigations as well when we interview alongside our law enforcement agents. And Julia was telling us all these stories of basically how she was able to crack serial killer after serial killer. And federal prosecutors around the country were pointing to her interviews specifically as what should be the gold standard of how all law enforcement interview. I'm not overselling this. She is just too humble to tell you that herself. So Julia, I'm sorry, I've blown your cover.
Well, it wasn't exactly that, Alice. It was like one interview I did once, and Assistant United States Attorney said it was really good. So that was it. It's not over.
No. I say all this because I think this is very important. The interview that you guys have heard and the analysis you're going to hear from Julia today, this is not just another person online telling you their thoughts about one of the most famous cases of all time. We truly have actually one of the preeminent experts in the country who made this her profession. And she has approached this case, this interview, and this analysis as she does the most serious of cases that she investigated. And I think that's worth noting here because there are a lot of talking heads out there who talk about all manners of cases who may or may not actually know what they're talking about. That could be me and Brett, but it's not Julia. Julia knows what she's talking about.
That's not true at all. You know exactly what you're doing. You do it very well. And it's a whole area that, I don't know prosecutions like you do. I don't know the law like you do. So, but I appreciate that, Alice.
Just to continue this praise fest. The thing I've kept thinking as I was sitting there
I am bright red. Just
I wish we could have worked with Julia. It would have been so much fun.
Do you know what I was thinking, Brett? The case that took us all over the country, we were on the plane together all the time. Brett and I racked up some airline miles, but it was so fun because we got to hang out with our law enforcement agents all the time. Had to go through the special check-in because they were essentially designated air marshals because of all the guns they were carrying, but no one else on the flight knew. It was so much fun and they were fun. I loved them. But Julia, if you were in the mix,
man.
we would have never gone to sleep at night. We would have just stayed up talking.
Oh, we would have. I'm an early bird. I'm no fun at all. I go to bed early. I get up early. I'm like an old lady.
Oh, whatever.
I've never been fun.
So transitioning to the subject at hand, which I'm sure Julia would be very fun. You're coming to CrimeCon, right?
I am.
Oh, we're going to be partying all night long. We're going to put a lot of that. Okay, so Terry Hobbs. Obviously, right. Terry Hobbs is someone who is a popular alternative suspect in this case, sort of wears these two hats because he's an alternative suspect. He's also a stepfather, a victim, somebody who's gone through a lot. I will say this just off the top, and I'm curious what you think about this, because I feel like it could cut a couple ways. But Hobbs, he's given some interviews before, but his willingness to sit down with two federal prosecutors and an FBI behavioral analyst, I thought was interesting. I thought it was interesting that he was willing to do that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I just think he kind of comes across, I'll talk to you. And then if you're going to insult him, he'll probably hang up on you or be very defiant. But if you're courteous to him, he'll sit down with an interview with anybody, probably.
So let me ask this, because like Brett said, he has given other interviews. You've heard them before. And then obviously you got to be on a video call with him for an hour and a half. How did you think our interview compared to the way that he has interviewed in the past in terms of, not substance yet, but in the way he was related to us, in the way he answered our questions, in the way he was kind of portraying? Very
similar to other friendly interviews, I'd say. I've seen a couple on the news, and then I've heard another podcast and interviewed him. And when he's not being attacked, he comes across the same way. He's very consistent in his behavior, his presentation, the points where I think he's sensitive about if he's questioned about them. And then, of course, there's the deposition where he was questioned and he just came across pretty bad, but he was on the defensive the whole time. So you get a sense of how he's going to be when he's on the defensive. And I'm not saying that it's wrong for him to be on the defensive. I mean, he was being questioned, I think, by somebody who thinks he killed the boys. So the questions were very pointed, and he had severe memory lapses and was very difficult. And that's not the kind of interview, when you asked me to participate, that's not the kind of interview I wanted to do with him. It serves no good to shut him down, to try to interrogate him, especially after all these years. He wasn't even first questioned until, 2007 by the police. And by then...
Which is insane.
It really is. That's unfortunate, but that's what we're working with. So his memory is not going to be as good. It's not fair to pin him down on certain times. And he was very defensive about that. He's like, I'm not going to tell you certain times because I've got myself in trouble. I get picked on for that. And he's absolutely right. And I didn't expect him. And it wasn't going to be walk us through the entire day and give us the times. That's not the kind of interview we can do with him. So what I wanted to do, and what every interview should be about, is to get as much information about the situation. I mean, he was somewhere we weren't. He saw things we never could see. So try to draw out as much as he can remember about things, not necessarily specifically about the crime itself, but just about what was going on that day, what his memories were. And then also questions geared toward, okay, what are his views? What's important to him? What are the themes that we're seeing throughout the interview? So that's the whole point of the interview for me when we constructed the questions we were going to ask him. I'm sure people were saying, why are you asking that? Well, there's a method to our madness in interviewing this. Like, it's to learn about him. I want to know what's important to him. I want to know what he remembers. What did he think about Stevie? What kind of relationship did they have? All these things. What does he value? What doesn't he value? And I felt like I came away with a pretty good sense of him from our talk with him.
Can I just ask you one question going back to something at the beginning? Because it's very common, I think, those of us, just normal human beings, when you see something like the deposition and you see someone who's being they're shutting down, they're angry, they're combative. You see this in testimony at trial. And even if, somebody's being cross-examined by somebody, a lawyer who's being a jerk, they're reacting with the same energy. A lot of people will judge the witness for that pretty harshly. In your experience, how much can you tell from that kind of reaction to questioning?
Well, I think you can tell how much experience somebody has being questioned, or have they been trained in testimony. I mean, as a law enforcement officer, even before the FBI, but training with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, we were trained on how to testify. We went through moot court. That was part of my training before I could be certified as a forensic scientist. I went through a moot court, got beat up pretty bad, videotaped, had to sit and watch with my training agent. It was terrible. And the same thing with the FBI. We're taught how to testify, and we prep with the prosecutors who are going to be questioning us in court, and then also prepping what to expect on cross-examination. So it can be really hard not to be offended or come across as a smart aleck when somebody's insulting you or making fun of you when they're questioning you in some way, shape, or form. And so I think sometimes when you see people lose their cool, you think, okay, well, they haven't been trained. That's my first thought. They just haven't been trained very well. Obviously it doesn't come across. You don't want to be defensive, even when it's human nature. I mean, I've seen people cross-examined and they've just been beat up pretty bad. And most anybody would just say, if this was a normal conversation, you would say to that person, do not talk to me like that, or I am getting up and walking out of this room. You can't do that when you're being insulted by a defense attorney or your integrity is being questioned. You have to sit there and take it and be professional and calm and never let your reactions come out. That can be very hard to do unless you've had a lot of experience and a lot of training. So I guess that's my 2 cents on when people become really defensive and angry.
Kind of along those lines, I know you said that his demeanor, his affect was very similar to other friendly interviews he's had. Can you describe for people, since they didn't get to really, see him face to face, what that affect was? And I say this because when we're looking at our witnesses, we think about, are they calculating? Are they malingering? Are they intentionally evading questions? Or are they being as straightforward as possible, recognizing that the way typical people communicate may not actually be very clear, but that may not be an indication of evasiveness? So I'm throwing out a bunch of different things I see in witnesses. How did he come off to you in the way he was kind of answering our questions in the way that you were describing, trying to get to know him, what's important to him?
I mean, he comes across, he's very mellow. He's very even keel, at least with us, because it was a friendly interview. He never lost his temper. Even when he was being questioned the deposition, he never really lost his temper, but it was like pulling teeth with him. It became like a child, like very defiant, but he's just very even tempered. I think he's not great at regulating some of his emotions in a way. Like, he doesn't lose his temper or cry or become heated in any way, but he's just not really great at regulating like his emotional leakage. You can definitely see the points that stick with him, that bother him. He has, we were just talking about passive aggressive people, Brett, and just kidding, but he gets his digs in when he talks about Pam. He's got to get his dig in on her. But, a lot of that can be normal too. I mean, these are, I'm not here to beat up on Terry at all, but those are just some things I noticed about him. And that's what we're doing. We're talking with him. We're trying to notice, what are the patterns? What is his normal reaction to things? Is he being deceptive, or is he being protective because he's been accused of being a murderer? And when he's tried to give information and it doesn't align with maybe what other people have said, or it's not exactly the same as what he said before, he feels, I think he said he'd been picked on, attacked. So he's very guarded. And, there's some topics he wasn't guarded. He wasn't guarded when we asked him about Stevie and what he was like and what he liked. He wasn't guarded at all. I thought those were genuine memories, fond memories that he had, that he shared with us.
Yeah. And just going back to something you said earlier, because I think this needs to be clear in case anyone's confused about it. Obviously, when a child is murdered, the first suspect is going to be family, stepfathers, parents. And the West Memphis police, for whatever reason, chose not to interview him in 1993. And like you said, he did not sit down for a formal interview, it seems, until 2007, which is 14 years later. Can you just express how wrong that was and how detrimental it was to figuring anything out, and particularly about him not having that contemporaneous interview. How much does that harm your ability to do any kind of assessment of?
It doesn't harm my ability to assess him, but it does harm the investigation into does he really have an alibi? We'll never really know with the timeline. You can't trust. I mean, people are comparing his statement to David Jacoby's statement. You can't trust either one of them, and I'm not accusing either of them of lying, but some of their memories align with each other, others don't. And it's just like, how can you trust what either one of them are saying? But everybody, and your listeners know this, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but every parent you need to sit down and go through a timeline with them right away. And where were they? Who did they see? What time was that? Right when it's fresh in their minds, whether you maybe can't do it right that night, but as soon as possible. I don't know why that wasn't done. That would just be common sense in any case. I know you're dealing with 3 missing kids, so you have 6 parents to sit down, but that needed to be done when they were doing neighborhoods and everything. All that had to be done, and it's all lost. And I think Terry's right when he says people just pick on me. It's just not fair to try to pin him down and, okay, we're going to believe what David said versus Terry. Well, that's not fair because they're both being interviewed so many years later. And it's hard to say who's lying or not, because it could just be that they just don't have a clear memory of it.
One of the situations that was stark in my mind that we'll never know is I think we asked him any memory of Stevie coming home and potentially eating. Did you remember cleaning up a bowl where he ate something? How could we possibly actually expect him to remember if he were even asked 14 years later, even asked really a year later? How could he remember something like that? But that is such a key fact that probably is lost forever. That information existed at one time, but I would not expect him. And it would really be him or Pam that would really know that, because Stevie's sister was much too young at the time to probably remember. So that's a piece of information that would have been great for the investigation that I think now just no longer exists in anyone's mind. But with that knowledge that we can't possibly expect him to remember everything, or really much, to be honest, back then. The way you framed the questions was about a lot of the rhythms of life with Stevie. So not that particular day, but what time did he normally come home? Were you normally home with him? Did he come home before dark? Those sorts of questions. I'm curious because we didn't debrief after this. You said that you felt like you got a good sense of who he was after those types of questions. Twofold question. You can answer however you see fit. One, did you feel like you found out any additional information that was helpful, either in assessing him or about the case that you had not previously learned from the other interviews he's given? Second, what was that impression that you got from him? You said you did get a feel for who he was. What was that feel that you got about him?
I think the one thing that I took away from our interview with him was he has this, the theme that was present throughout the interview is he has this really strong emphasis on responsibility as a father and on family. And, he was the one who said, and this is where the passive aggressiveness came in a little bit, I did homework with Stevie. I helped him because Pam either wouldn't or couldn't, but he was the one, he kept things together. He said, he described how Stevie called him Daddy Terry, and his role, at least this is what he's expressing to us, he sees this as very important. And even when he was describing to us David Jacoby, I asked him, what was David like? What was your relationship with David like?
We called him like a family man, right?
He said he was praising David. He was a good man. He was a provider for his family. These were attributes that he described David, and that he felt this is why David was a good person, because he provided for his family. So you see this is something that's really important. And I think another thing I took away from Terry, and this is his perception, this is what he thinks is important. It doesn't necessarily mean he was responsible. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is what he's expressing to us. But the other thing that I thought was interesting, and first of all, what I want to say is anything that I read, unless it's the actual case file, I'm always careful because I know there could be an agenda there. So this is not from the case file. This would be from books and maybe some documentaries or And I had this impression of him that perhaps he was a real disciplinarian, and he may have been. He may, I've heard maybe allegations of abuse, but like I just thought he was real strict, like he was going to have his finger on the pulse of what his kids are doing all the time. And he expresses that with us. Like Stevie was always home. I watched him. But then we asked him, what were the rules? Something along those lines. And the listeners will hear exactly. So I'm just paraphrasing. But what were the rules? And he's like, well, we really didn't have rules. It was just like, my only rule was something like, you need to do good. And there's no rules. So there's a little contradiction there. A contradiction of like, I value these attributes in a father figure or a father as my role being a good provider and controlling everything and making sure everybody's okay. But yet I don't really have any rules other than you just got to do good. And, you would think somebody who was a strict disciplinarian is like, well, you better not back talk. You better not, leave the house without permission, all these things. But there were no rules. So it comes across maybe that my impression is that while he projected these are important qualities, maybe in practice, he might have been a little lax. Like maybe he wasn't as strict. And he could, like I said, Stevie was mouthing off to him. He might spank him. I think he said he used a belt to discipline his children. This is not in our interview, but some other interview. But was he a little lax? Like there really were no rules, which could be a little confusing for Steve. Like where I don't really need to be home at a certain time. That was kind of what we were going with. Like, did he know we had to be home at a certain time? Well, it sounds like maybe he didn't. So there's a little bit of a contradiction there with what he perceives as being important versus what he may practice. That is normal. And that is absolutely normal. We all think these are great qualities, but do we always live up to those qualities? No. So I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but these are just little things, here we are, we have this opportunity to interview somebody who's some people's main suspects in one of the highest profile cases. And so, you want to learn as much about this person as possible. And those are some of the takeaways I had, kind of a surface level with Terry.
Yeah, one of the takeaways from that, I thought it was really interesting because I think we had heard or got the impression that if Stevie weren't home by a certain time, right, to eat his dinner or something like that, there were going to be consequences or it was going to be some disciplinary action. And it wasn't even like a visceral reaction. Sometimes you can't help but viscerally react when you ask a witness a question that is offensive to them, right? Like, I mean, this is an example of a way I've asked a question before that gets a visceral response from a witness, even if they don't verbally say something. It's like, but like, you like little kids, right? I mean, that's something like that, right? Where they'll be like, oh, no. He didn't even respond to the fact viscerally that I could see when we were like, well, there was a time that Stevie had to be home, right? He was like, no, not really. Like he was trying to reach back in his memory. And I thought that was so humanizing for a moment because I had this image based on a lot of the lore around this case that he was this incredibly strict person. But the way he was talking about his role as Daddy Terry, as being the one who made sure homework got done, for example, because work was getting more difficult by this grade and he was making sure that the kids were doing their homework in the right way. It felt like maybe his response to the no rules was less no rules, but rather like when you look at the way parenting is, there's every situation, it has the facts around it and it's that kid for that situation. So like, yes, you're not supposed to jump on the couches, but maybe, if we're celebrating your birthday and you're so excited you got that new Lego set, you get to jump on the couch. And so in my mind, there's no rule that you can't jump around the couch. It's that I am a present parent. And that was something that kind of clicked for me when I was talking to him was the way he forgot almost every detail about everything in my, general assessment of the interview. But the feeling of what it was like to be a father, I think came across to me in a way that I had not appreciated in the case file. I'm curious if you saw that too.
Yeah, I did. And I saw it too when we were asking him, he didn't have a time to be home. Well, this was the first time Stevie was not right there. He would only bike, a block away. And Terry said that, which I'm not sure is true, but, he said I could always see him. He was not too far away. And I don't think he even did that a lot because, something Terry brought up over and over again, which is a theme, is about the pool. He talked about the pool. We even made a joke about it. I'm like, you have a pool? because he kept talking about how Stevie liked to swim in the pool, and he was always in the pool, and that's where he usually was. And he just talked about that pool a lot. And so I got the impression that that was the last real happy memory he had. He just kept going back to that. It was a happy memory. It was safety. And I think I've heard him interviewed before where he said, Stevie was a very strong swimmer. He has a lot of memories about Stevie in the pool and being in the pool and having that pool at their house. But yeah, back to what you're saying, Alice, I think it's because there weren't a lot of rules. I don't know if they didn't need them, because Stevie never wandered off too far, was always around. This is the first time, I think we asked him, was this the first time he really was gone? And it was. This had not happened before. He wasn't allowed to, I don't know if he wasn't allowed or he just never did, but he didn't wander the neighborhood. He was within eyesight of Pam or Terry when he was out on his bike, or he was in the pool. So this was an unusual day.
Summer is here. While we might set goals for swimsuit season, lose weight, exercise more, eat better, it's hard to achieve them without a plan. That's what makes Prolong's 5-day fasting mimicking diet your summer-ready secret weapon. Prolong gives you a science-backed, structured approach to target fat loss and support lean muscle and reset your metabolism so you can look your best and feel confident all season long. Prolong is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages. It's designed to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. Next Gen builds on the original Prolong with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. It's developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers. Prolong has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. Guys, I wouldn't have believed this if I didn't do it for myself. I don't want to fast. I like eating, and it's really hard for me to completely not have any food. Enter Prolong. They have this amazing system where they deliver everything to your door. There are snacks and soups and teas that actually help you eat but stay in a fasting state. I couldn't believe how effective it was. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day nutrition program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's prolonlife.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little money there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. As summer winds down, I'm all about refreshing my wardrobe with staple pieces for the season ahead. Quince nails it with luxe essentials that feel effortless and look polished, perfect for layering and mixing. Their styles are so versatile. I find myself reaching for them again and again. Think chic cashmere and cotton sweaters starting at just $40, washable silk tops, and classic denim pants. Timeless styles you'll keep coming back to. And the best part? Everything with Quince is half the cost of similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you luxury without the markup. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. Guys, there are so many different pieces in my wardrobe that I go to again and again, and they're all from Quince, especially with the weather starting to cool down, hopefully soon. I love my cashmere wear from Quince. Nothing is quite as soft or as luxurious, but an incredible price point. So elevate your fall wardrobe essentials with Quince. Go to quince.com quince.com/prosecutors for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/prosecutors to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/prosecutors.
It's interesting to see what he says, and can you match it up with other things? He talked about how Stevie couldn't go out unless his homework was done. And if you read Pam Hobbs' interviews, she talks about how that day she said that to Stevie. She said, you can't go out till you do your homework. And he said, I've already done it. And he had it. He's like, see, I've already done it. And so that's one reason she let him go. And so that sort of matched up with what he was saying, that this was kind of unusual that he would just go out instead of staying close by. Now, she thought he's coming back at 4:30. In her mind, can't get that far because it's already probably 3:30 or something, right? When this happens. Just going back to what you were saying about him as sort of a disciplinarian. One thing that I thought was interesting, I expected he would run away from that more because the theory most people have, there's the wild out there theories that are absurd. But I think the theory that most people have is he was mad that the boys hadn't come home. He goes out, he finds them in the woods, and he's punishing them, and it gets out of hand, right? That's sort of the theory. So I thought he'll probably run away from this whole notion of being a disciplinarian because he'll want to distance himself from that theory. But when you asked him which one of Stevie's friends was the troublemaker who caused mischief, he was like, nobody caused mischief in my house. Like, I didn't play that. He was very sort of like, no, when you come to my house, whatever the rules are, and it's not really defined.
As long as you're doing good.
Yeah, you're going to do what's right or you're going to get in trouble. I don't know. It was a little thing, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he does say things that fly in the face of, well, he might be guilty or not. And I've heard him say, this is not something I don't think we actually specifically asked about. Maybe we did. Yeah, we did ask him about playing guitar, but as we know, David Jacoby says he was over at his house playing guitar for an hour. Well, that would benefit Terry, I think, to be over there for an hour.
Right.
And yet he denies it for whatever. So he doesn't seem to be too strategic in trying to answer the question in what would paint him as in the best light and give him the best alibi. He doesn't do that. Like, he should say, yeah, I was over there for an hour. In fact, it might have been 2-3 hours, Yeah. But that's what David says, but he denies that. And, I don't know that we specifically asked him, but he did distance himself. Like, I wasn't over there all the time. I think his normal day was to come home from work, hang out with the kids. And if it was a nice day, they were in the pool.
That's what he said. He's like, I didn't
basically, that he didn't really go any place. That was what he was telling us. That was a typical day.
And I guess they were relatively new to the neighborhood. Like, he knew David Jacoby, but it wasn't like they had a lot of really close friends. For instance, he had not met John Mark Byers until that night. The first time they meet each other is over at the Morehouse. So
right. Yeah. It didn't seem like they had a lot of friends in West Memphis or in that neighborhood. And David and I think his wife were their friends, at least that Terry knew and socialized with, if really even that much. But he had nice things to say about David and about David's ability to provide for his family. So that was really important. He definitely has mistrust. He's careful about what he says because things have come back to haunt him. It's not fair and it's reckless, I think, to try to pin him down on every little story and then accuse him of being the murderer because his timeline didn't match up with David Jacoby's timeline. And it's just like, that's just not fair to do that to him. And so he just wouldn't and I knew he wouldn't because I heard him on other interviews. He's not going to answer questions. Okay, what time did you wake up? When did you get home? What time did you see Dana Moore? What time did you see Mark Byers? What time did you go over to this area? There was one thing that I caught and I thought it was
Fortune.
So
that was the only time he knew was something happened when Wheel of Fortune was coming up.
Yeah, he had talked to somebody who said he had to get in to watch Wheel of Fortune. Yeah, that was a witness. That was probably one detail that he offered us. But I'm going to have to go back and look. But there was one point where he was talking about the next morning or the next day when they had heard the boys had been found. They were at the school. He talks about how they went over to where I guess it was the parking lot of the Mayfair apartments. I think that's what he was describing. And the way that he phrased it was like, this time we went over there. It was like it was a different place than he'd been before. And so I thought, okay, he hasn't been to that area, because it was just something I caught. I'm like, okay, they never went to that area before, because it sounded to me like this was the first time, the way he phrased it. I don't think that's something he could do on purpose. That's just, I don't think he's not that savvy of a manipulator or liar or something that he's going to say something like, well, this time we went over there. It just seemed like, okay, this is different. He hadn't been over to the Mayfair apartments before, or the parking lot area.
The like slip of the affect. It wasn't even like a main feature of what he was saying. He wasn't saying, this is my first time there. It was the way he phrased it. I can't remember how he said it, but
yeah,
kind of along those lines, because I think some people will be wondering this. I'll give you my assessment. You tell me if it's right or not. Very, very often he would not get defensive, but say, I'm not going to even speculate on that. My sense was that there was probably more information if he wasn't being interviewed. If he was just talking to someone one-on-one, he had some idea of what the answer may be, times, or what he did, or what someone may have done. But it was such a foggy memory that he knew if he said something, it would be kind of spun out of control. It would be pegged on him. People would be looking at it as if it were written in stone. And he's like, I'm just speculating from a knowledge base, but I've now learned from my past mistakes, I'm not even going to do that. So kind of like how we counsel people to answer questions on the stand. Don't speculate. If you don't know, then don't say, that you know. But I did not get the sense that he knew something, like not speculating, but he knew something and did not say it, or said something that was like false or not true to what he knew. So there was very little information that we could pin him down on, but I felt like he was holding himself back, recognizing it's going to be more speculation than fact. But I did not get the sense of kind of being misled or not being able to pull out information that he knew for sure. Was that the sense that you got in the way he was answering questions?
I don't think he was trying to purposely mislead us. What I think he does do, what I want to say is this happens in many cases with many parents where a child is missing or they're found deceased. Parents lie. They do. They tell lies. They leave out things. It's called impression management, and they may be hiding something that's completely unrelated. And that is normal. And that's why you have to kind of get through that to get to the truth. What is the truth? What are they trying to hide? And I think that's all he was trying to do with us, is manage our impression of him. And I do think he holds back. And I think he is not telling us everything, but I don't think that means it's the ultimate truth that he's the murderer. I don't necessarily think that. What I found, he seemed to be more fixated on the fact that people keep accusing him of not telling Pam sooner. And that seems to really bother him. And he's like, people keep forgetting that, and I don't know if this is an exact quote, but I jotted it down. People never remember that it was Pam who let him go ride his bicycle. Instead, people only talk about how I didn't tell Pam that I couldn't find Stevie until I picked her up from work. So he's like really self-conscious about how the timeline reflects on him, but it's more about that he didn't go tell Pam. And a couple of things, there was something he said, and when she's like, why didn't you tell me? And he's like, he told us that they just hadn't run across him yet. He's like, he didn't really think Stevie was missing. I just didn't think we ran across him. That is not a frantic parent. He was not frantic. He's like, we just didn't run across him. That is very passive. To me, like, we couldn't find him. If you're out actually looking, then you're going to say, I couldn't find him. Not, we didn't run across him. It's very passive. So I get this sense of that he was not really looking that hard. And I think that bothers him. Now, whether he killed them, I don't know. I'm going to say I don't think so. But it really, like, there's this passiveness up until there's a point where he realizes something's wrong.
This is why I think he doesn't say what I think was the truth. She was over there playing guitar with David Jacoby that night because I think he was supposed to be out looking for Stevie. That's what Pam thought he was going to do. And he blames himself for that. Like, he feels guilty about the fact that he didn't think it was a big deal until much later on. And that sort of goes along, I think, with what you're saying. I think, they were going to run across him. They were going to find him, whatever, no biggie. And then it starts to become obvious that actually, no, there is something going on. And like you said, that managing the impression, making it seem like, no, I was really concerned from the beginning. Stevie never left the front yard. And so, of course, I was looking for him the whole time. I wasn't playing guitar. Like, he's more concerned about making sure people think he cared than he is about constructing an alibi that might keep people from thinking he committed a murder, which I think is really interesting.
I think you're right. And I think that comes across. I mean, he was not really looking for him. And this is where the contradictory in his, like, how strict was he? I think he was just sort of like, he'll show up. We'll come across him. And when that didn't happen, the weight of it is like, oh, this is not good. And the one thing we do have to understand about Terry, and I've gotten this from other interviews and from our interview as well, he's not really good at, he's good at taking responsibility. Like, I'm the man of the house. I provide for the family. I keep things in order. I'm Daddy Terry. That's really important to him. But he's not really good at taking responsibility for other things. Like, if he's engaged in violence against Pam, like, it's always just kind of like I was pushed toward it more so than, so he's not great about that. And I think he struggles to take this responsibility for, I wasn't really looking for him maybe the way I should have been. I think it's because he didn't really think something was wrong. And he's like, then it starts to get a little dark. He's getting a little more, like, I was a little concerned there. But he said, then when Pam's parents came, you start getting a little worried. So it took other adults, like her parents, to come say, this is a serious situation. He's out. And that was the moment I think he realized, maybe I should have taken this more serious. Like, that's not what he told us, but that was the moment, because I wanted to know, when were you really worried? Well, when Pam's parents showed up. They're other adults. They're concerned. And I think that was when it hit him, like, something's wrong and maybe I should have done something sooner. That was what I took from some of that questioning.
One thing to add to that, what you've been saying about that night and maybe not taking it very seriously, is he, all throughout the interview, he did get his digs in about Pam. We know that relationship soured, so that's not surprising looking backwards. But on that day too, and it could go multiple ways, but he kept emphasizing, if I were home, he wouldn't have gone out, because when I'm home, he's at home doing his homework or he's doing other things before he's allowed to go out. But I had no control, because when I got home, I was like, Pam, where is he? And she's like, well, he went out already. And so there was very much, I wonder if there may have also been a fight between him and Pam that night or that day, because he kept emphasizing how this was completely out of the ordinary. If he were home, then there was no way that Stevie would have gone out, because every other day he was home with the two kids. He kept saying that. The kids are always with me. Pam worked nights, so they were always with me. Of course they were with me, and he said it multiple times. And there was, of course, kind of an underlying animosity towards Pam throughout the interview. But that particular day, I wonder if this shaded a lot of his impression management, as you said. I can imagine if you're mad at Pam, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. He's fine. You let him go. You deal with it. I'm going to go play guitar or something along those lines. And that's a more complex thing to explain to the police now after the fact, when, Stevie and his friends have been brutally murdered. So that was one thing that I caught when he kind of kept putting blame back on Pam. Of course, also, that's a lot to carry for any one person to think that they were someone who could have prevented a horrible murder. So I would expect him to want to place blame, but I also wonder if there's more there interpersonally that has nothing to do with guilt, innocence or guilt or alibi, that we don't know of, because there was more interpersonal strife that had nothing to do with Stevie specifically, but maybe with him and Pam, that affected his seemingly lackadaisical approach to the missing situation.
Yeah. And I agree. I don't think their marriage was perfect before this happened, and then it deteriorated. I think there were interpersonal problems. There may have been, and I don't know if I know this or I'm just assuming this, but I think there may have been domestic violence between the two of them prior to this. So you already have a tense relationship, and then you have, and this is also normal. Something, the child is missing and there is blame. Both parents, you let him go. Well, you weren't looking for him. And I'm sure that did not help things between their marriage. And obviously they stayed together for a while, but ultimately the marriage ended. But yeah, I think there was a lot of blame. And he does say at one point, I think he said, well, Pam blamed herself. So he wants us to know Pam was taking responsibility for this mistake she made. So he's kind of letting us know that's, again, kind of his side coming out saying, see, this wasn't my fault. And the other thing he said about in the aftermath of when the boys are found, that, Pam's family is very protective of her. And so I think what was going on is he's saying, Pam let him go, and her family saying, yeah, but you weren't even looking for him. And they were protecting Pam, and he kind of got ostracized already. And, I think they were protective of her because they felt like maybe they needed to protect her from him generally, but he was ostracized. And it's like that was a sticking point to him. Nobody ever remembers it. It was her who let him go. And if she had not let him go, this never would have happened. We wouldn't have lost our son. And I wouldn't be here being blamed for this. And we would have had our pool and our life. And it's like just this whole, it's kind of this symbolism here with him.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a perfect life before, and then it all.
It's like what I see it as is like if a child passes or disappears and never comes home, it's like, a parent may latch onto a favorite toy or go into their rooms. Or I know a mother who lost her daughter and they moved to a different home and she moved her room and left it exactly the same. So this is, to me, this was Terry's thing to hold on to. And I think that pool is really important. And we, like I said, we made a little joke about it, but I made light, of something that I think just because I made the little joke in our interview to lighten things up does not mean I did not realize the significance of it. I don't know if he realizes it, but I was
going to say, I don't think the joke registered with him, which is when it really struck me how kind of important that symbolism was to him.
Yeah, I just don't think he quite realizes, because I don't know that he's dealt with everything. He did talk with us about going to grief counseling, trying to go, and he's been kicked out of some groups because some people think he's guilty. But I thought that was really interesting. If that's true, if Terry has attempted to go to grief counseling, then I would find that very hard to believe that the person who did that to those boys has any grief. And so I thought if that's true, I'm pretty sure he didn't kill the boys, because the person who killed the boys, I don't think has grief over it. I don't think they have remorse over it at all. None. And where I see Terry's guilt lies more in the timeline and not looking for Stevie and being blamed for not telling Pam sooner. That just seems to be where his guilt seems focused, as opposed to feeling guilty about actually having committed the murders.
So one part of the interview that I thought was fascinating, and I hope people appreciated sort of the window that you got to see there, because this conversation was not unlike most interviews with witnesses and suspects. It's not like it is in the movies. I mean, I guess sometimes it is, with like the light shining on them and the good cop and the bad cop, one cop's yelling. It may get to that at some point. But initially, it usually is much more sort of friendly, trying to build rapport, having a conversation, asking questions that aren't pointed, but are if the person is guilty. And the questions you asked about the crime scene, whether you would have been able to see the bikes, the parking area, like these are all things that if he did it, he knows the answer to, because he would have parked there, because he didn't walk a mile and do this and then walk a mile back to the neighborhood. He would have had to have parked there. He would have seen the bikes on his way into the woods, because that's why he would have known where to throw them. Like you asked, where were they found, who found them, all this stuff. Like I thought that was a really fascinating part of the conversation. And I was curious how you thought his responses, if his responses to those questions told you anything.
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping for slip ups like, oh, you shouldn't know that. I agree with you, Brett. I felt I don't think he was being evasive on purpose. I think he was trying to be helpful, but he really didn't know some of the answers. Like, I don't know if you can see that. I don't know. Like, there were things too where I thought he was very honest. I'm like, well, would you have been able to see them from standing up where you would have like parked? I was asking about like, is there a parking area? And he's like, I don't think so, because it was pretty overgrown. I think he was trying to be helpful, trying to remember. And there's nothing there that I thought that doesn't make sense to me, or I think you're lying about that. Nothing stood out. I thought he was being honest. I think some people will listen to the interview and say that he's being evasive, and I think he might be in some ways being evasive, but also I think he just doesn't remember. It's 1993.
I do want to transition to sort of a more general discussion of the crime, but are there any other questions you had, Alice, or any other thoughts you had, Julia, that you wanted to highlight about the conversation?
So, one other thing, I had asked him if when the three were arrested, or when they made the arrests and the homicide, was he relieved? And he had no relief. And I would think the guilty person, and he could be lying again, but the guilty person would at least have some sense of private relief. But he just said, no, I'm angry. I was angry. And he just, in that anger, really seemed to be very authentic to me, and not something, it was just like anger that was tangled up in grief, and it didn't appear strategic or calculated. It seemed like a real response. And I think he's gotten in touch with like the 12 stages of grief, and so clearly he's had some grief counseling, which again goes to like, would this killer really seek out grief counseling? Is Terry Hobbs such a calculated killer that I'm going to go get grief counseling to make it look like, I don't think so. I don't think he's that strategic. But I thought that just was a genuine reaction. I was angry. And I was thinking, I was a little relieved. I'm like, well, you're relieved because you're the killer. No, but that was just another little thing. This isn't an interview where, I know for sure he did it or he didn't do it. I came away from it feeling like, okay, here's what's important to him. Here's where he's focused. It doesn't seem that he seems to be guilty over murders. He's maybe guilty or mad about other things, but not because he committed murders. And, I know he wants to be perceived as a certain way, and maybe he was like that sometimes, but I don't think he was like that all the time. And I think that's the impression that he's trying to manage. That's what I think ultimately is maybe what he's hiding and covering.
Yeah, no, I think that was an incredibly poignant question you asked, and his response wasn't textbook. In the textbook sense of sometimes people will give you answers because they've seen it on movies or they know that's the right response to give. Many of his responses really did feel genuine in his response, in the sense that I don't think there was an overarching theme. I didn't feel like I was being toyed with, and maybe he was so good at it, I had no idea that it was happening. But with respect to like the relief point, you could see that you had triggered in him how angry and terrible that point in time was. There were some questions where he was just answering it from like a very stoic perspective, but that was one of the times where I like saw the emotion come through that seemed to reach back to 1993. And there weren't many times that he could access that even. Of course he's going to be guarded. This is a videotape interview with prosecutors and former FBI.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And the questions that we asked him were designed to not be the same questions he's been asked before. It's to elicit responses that are unexpected. And I think we got that. He was asked questions he wasn't expecting, and he had no issues. We had a very nice conversation with him. He wasn't uncomfortable at all, never seemed to be at all. And I think because he hadn't been asked these questions before, we got some very genuine reactions. And if you take away what I think the timeline is, which I think makes it really difficult for him to be responsible for this, if you're just looking at the interview, I just don't see him as the person who committed these murders based on our conversation with him. This was a little window into Terry Hobbs, but I appreciated the opportunity to sit and talk with him. I think we got a lot out of it.
Let me ask you just one more question, because it is something people always point to. It's sort of a cliche thing in profiling. He talked about leaving. He talked about leaving the area. He talked about sort of Pam was investigating. She was investigation mode and all that sort of thing. What did you think about that part of the conversation?
Yeah. I mean, that's always suspicious when somebody just picks up and leaves the area suddenly without a reason. Usually they make up a reason or they get out. He has a reason. He has a reason he left. And that's what we're usually looking for, is like an unexplained trip that somebody, or they just pick up and leave, or their reason doesn't make sense. His reason for leaving does make sense. And you can't just say, okay, this is suspicious. It's certainly something you always look at. We always look at people's post-offense behaviors, but you have to look at it in the context of, okay, did this make sense? Or did he run off and dye his hair blonde and have
Who
a
would
passport?
do that? And $10,000 that they just accidentally got?
Yeah. I mean, he had a reason. He's open about why he moved away, and he explained that to us. But yeah, it was interesting because originally we had asked him, well, what did you do? Like, I was asking him how he coped, and he said, well, the media is hounding you and you just kind of hide away. Well, they only stayed in that house for 2 more weeks. So he really wasn't there for very long until they moved. So yeah, certainly that raises a little bit of a red flag, but I thought he explained it. I understood it. I don't think it's something I would say, aha, you did it. There was another thing, one more thing from the interview, which something I think is important. I mean, Terry was pretty clear about what the media was reporting, and they were reporting a lot of things, so much so his dad had come down and said that I heard on the radio that there are mutilation and castration, and he said the media was asking them questions. They were hearing more in the media than they were from the police. I mean, he had no issues with the police. He said they were communicating with him, but they were hearing all the rumors. And I just want to get a sense of what was going around, being in that area and coming across this crime. There is no way that these detectives that originally found the boys didn't go home and maybe tell somebody what they saw, who told somebody. The police may not have been providing information officially, but this was going around. You see that in other people's interviews, people calling in saying, I gave Jason Baldwin a knife. Well, how do you know it was a knife? How do you know? Because you heard they were stabbed. I mean, there were rumors. I mean, and you see that with a lot of the interviews that people give. They call in information. Well, they're calling in information based on what they've heard. And Terry verified that they were hearing all sorts of things. I had heard, well, we didn't hear anything till trial or something, but Terry knew things long before trial, like within days of the finding of the bodies. The media was reporting all sorts of horrible things that turned out to be somewhat true.
Look, guys, I love true crime, probably more than most people, but know what I don't love? Thinking about true crime all night. I spend so much time researching these cases and getting into all of the bloody details, then end up scaring myself to death and spending even more time trying to get myself to sleep. For the longest time, I would wake up groggy, dragging myself around, and binging coffee all day to keep myself awake and hold off the crash. But I've finally found something that breaks that cycle for good. Enter Beam's Dream Powder. Because when it comes to solving the case of your sleepless nights, Dream is a lifesaver. When I found Dream, everything changed. I started sleeping through the night without tossing and turning, and I woke up energized, not groggy. It's been a game changer for me. Dream is made with a powerful blend of all natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. It's designed to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling amazing. And unlike other sleep aids, there's no next day grogginess, just great restful sleep. Plus, Dream tastes incredible, and it's become a part of my nightly routine. Simple, easy, and effective. My focus and energy came back and finally felt like I could tackle life head on instead of just trying to get through it. And I'm not the only one. Beam has already improved over 17.5 million nights of sleep, helping people across the country wake up and feel their best. And here's the twist. Beam's giving our listeners an exclusive offer of up to 40% off their best-selling Dream Powder. That's right, up to 40% off to finally crack the case of your bad sleep. Go to shopbeam.com/prosecutors and use code prosecutors at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/prosecutors and use code prosecutors for up to 40% off. Because better sleep, that's the kind of mystery you can solve. This is an ad by BetterHelp. These days, I feel like there's advice for everything: cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With the internet and information overload about mental health and wellness, it can be a struggle to know what's true and what actions to take these days. Using trusted resources and talking to live therapists can get you personalized recommendations and help you break through the noise. I know for me, it's so helpful to know how to be my best self, to learn positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, and enter BetterHelp. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. And it works, with an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for a live session based on over 1.7 million client reviews. And it's very convenient. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/prosecutors. That's BetterHelp.com/prosecutors. Guys, we spend so much time caring for the skin on our face, but what about our neck? With summer in full swing, your neck and chest are more exposed than ever. Whether you're rocking sundresses, swimsuits, or strappy tops, your neck is out there for the world to see, and it's one of the first places to show signs of aging. That's why Go Pure Beauty created their revolutionary Tighten and Lift Neck Cream, perfect for your summer skincare routine. It's powered by clinically proven active ingredients. This advanced formula is designed to visibly firm, smooth, and rejuvenate the delicate skin on your neck and chest in as little as 4 to 8 weeks. I've been spending nearly every day this summer at the pool, and honestly, my skin started to show the effects of being in the sun all the time, especially my neck because I'm always in a bathing suit. Well, once I started Go Pure, I really saw how incredible it was. It wasn't just about transforming the skin on my neck. They have these full-line science-backed skin and body care to tighten, lift, and smooth skin from head to toe. All Go Pure products are cruelty-free, paraben-free, and sulfate-free, so you know you're giving your skin clean, effective care without the harsh chemicals or compromises. With over 1 million jars sold, this beauty secret is no longer a secret. For a limited time, our listeners get 25% off Go Pure with code prosecutors at checkout. Just head to gopurebeauty.com, use code prosecutors, and you're all set. And after you buy, do us a favor. When they ask where you heard about Go Pure, tell them it was from our show.
So, talking about those horrible things, let's talk about this case in general. Don't want to keep you all night, but I think we'd be remiss if we did not get your expert opinion. Just some assumptions, which I think are true, and I think we can say. So, we have a crime scene here. 3 boys, 8 years old, brutally murdered. Whether they were stabbed or castrated, whether that was animal predation, doesn't matter. They were brutally murdered. Lots of anger, beaten, tied up in this very unique way, secreted in this ditch. Then whoever did this appears as though they took the time to clean up the area, to clean off the blood, do that sort of thing. So based on that, just sort of what we have here, like if you were just walking into this case and the detective said, look, here are the facts of the case, what are your sort of initial thoughts? It's located in sort of a small wooded area. You got a neighborhood on one side, you got a truck stop on the other, you have an interstate, like all that stuff. What are your thoughts about this crime?
So I'm going to caveat this as I always do, Brett and Alice. So we do plan to cover this in a very narrow way on our show. We have not discussed it. So I have not consulted with my colleagues. And so I want to put that out there. My opinion could change talking with them if they see something I don't. So my initial impressions would be that somebody likely followed the boys in there from that neighborhood, or the person was already out there. So very obviously you have familiarity. Now, I'm well aware of the controversy surrounding the injuries. It has always been my opinion, and I'm not like an animal expert or anything like that, but I have seen a lot of things, and a lot of those injuries do look like, I mean, especially when you get in water, you get fish and crabs and stuff, and they do nibble. Fish will nibble on low-hanging areas, and a lot of that does to me look like, animal activity. But, I'm not a medical examiner, I'm not an expert, but that's what I would have assumed, especially having been in water for the length of time. We've pulled bodies out of water. They have like little bite marks on them and nibbles and stuff like that from aquatic life. And aquatic life is very active. So that would be my initial response. I don't know that I would say stabbing, but obviously you have to do the autopsy. Very brutal, like almost like a blitz attack, bashing them in the heads. To me, that seems to be like, that's probably the first thing that happened. Likely they weren't expecting it. And I also see, and I think we've talked about this before, somewhat of a loss of control. You have maybe control over two, one gets away. And to me, it seems like if you had multiple offenders, you might have better control over the scene. And obviously 3 people were arrested and convicted. So many people think more than one person involved. And therefore, and because there are 3 victims and the tying and their different knots and stuff like that, I'm not at this point willing to say I think it's more than one offender. Just statistically, I will always say with the information available, it's likely one offender. And there have been times where I have gone outside against my better judgment and said, I think a woman did this, or I think there may be more than one offender. And every single time I've had a colleague say, we don't see that very often. And they've always been right. I'm like, that's not right then. So I'm really careful when I go against statistics. So I need to look at it a little more closely. I want my colleagues to look at it. I want to have a discussion with them about, do we think it's more than one offender? I still lean toward one offender, just because even when you have multiple victims, you have most of the time one offender. And it's not even statistically, it's like 99%. I made that up, but it's overwhelming. And I don't know, to me, that the different knots necessarily change. I mean, Joe D'Angelo, he tied different knots. There were a lot of people who thought there were multiple people involved with his crimes, and victims even heard. I heard him talking to somebody. So there were times where they thought there were multiple people because you had the way they were bound, you had what you heard talking. And Walika, they were convinced there that there was more than one offender, and there wasn't. So
following up on that, you mentioned...
But I could change my mind.
Totally. We are giving you... That's why we laid out the set of facts. This is very limited.
I am perfectly fine with somebody changing my mind and saying, I think I was wrong about that. I am good at that. I'm humble enough. I can do that.
No. And I think this is helpful, though, because we're saying you've just walked into the crime scene, right? We all have to work off of the information. Yes. And this is helpful because your initial gut reactions do tell you a lot based on your past experience of your next investigative steps as well. But you said blitz attack, and you said in your mind, someone who knew the area either followed them in or saw them go in and after them. With that in mind, with what, you've just walked into the scene, does this look like a planned attack or an accidental encounter that ended horribly?
Well, it looks more like it was an accidental, only because I know that they were out riding around. I mean, I know the history of it, with the fact that it just doesn't seem like it was necessarily planned, because you would have to know that the 3 of them were going to be there. And I don't think anyone necessarily knew that. And I know we talked about this before, but I think at one point, Michael Moore said to someone, we're running late, we got to go. And I thought that was pretty curious. And I wondered, are they meeting somebody, or are they going to see something? Or so if that's the case, then maybe we did have something more planned. But it doesn't appear on its surface to me to be something that was planned. But what you do have is you have somebody who, after extreme violence, gathered themselves and cleaned that scene up and did a really good job. I mean, I don't know that I would say sophisticated, but it was well done. And it was done probably pretty quickly. This is not somebody dealing with delusions, or this is somebody who's rational, logical, knows I've got to hide these bodies because either they find them and they know it's me, or because I have a close relationship with the boys, or somebody saw me with the boys. Another thing I've thought about in this particular case is that we always associate the concealing of a body with a close personal relationship or a known relationship of some sort. And when I say known relationship, it could be two people met, they were seen together, the offender knows they were seen together. And so, the offender needs to create time and distance. The other thing I've thought, and I think it has to do with the bikes being thrown into the bayou. I've just wondered, like, somebody didn't even want anyone to know they went into the woods at all. And so it's almost like, are they concealing the entire area? Because if they respond to that area, then that person would be a likely suspect. And so I've always wondered, does it have more to do with the woods themselves or with a known relationship of the boys? Because it just always bothered me. The bikes were thrown in there. And so to me, it seems like somebody went in the woods, that direction, came out of the woods, and either going in through the bikes in, coming out through the bikes in. But I really feel it's somebody close by in the area, like really close by, and they don't want anyone even near the woods.
This is why I love you, because, and not just because you just said something that I've thought about, but so yes. So
well, no, it is because I did. Because if I was saying something, that,
no, I'd still love you, but
it's terrible.
So the idea, I love this, but I want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
The woods are the reason for hiding the body, because it could be someone who was known to be in the woods. And so if the boys were killed in the woods, that person would be a suspect, because people would say, well, Johnny, whatever, he's always down there in those woods. You should take a look at him because he's somebody who might be down there. And so the hiding of the boys could be not because there's a connection to the boys, but because there's a connection to the woods. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. Or a connection to the area, like anyone coming near the woods, just like vicinity wise too. Yes, it's exactly what you're saying, but it also could be because they live right there. I don't want anyone even coming over here because I live right here. And if they're over here looking, they're going to know I'm a suspect. I don't even want them here. So I think that's a possibility to consider. And this is something I've always thought of when I've kind of looked at the case. I always thought that, like, even back when I was watching the documentaries and was, I got to say, heavily influenced. I've learned my lesson, by the way. I was young and impressionable, but I've changed after seeing documentaries done on my own cases. So I'm like, that's so wrong. So yeah, I've thought about it a lot. And, the woods, I think, are meaningful to the person because they either live there, spent time there, and they don't even want the person to know that the boys were even in the woods. And that's why you have this effort. Now, like I said, we see this kind of effort when somebody knows the victim really well. But I think it may be tied to the woods themselves. I mean, there's an extraordinary amount of effort to hide them. And that's high risk. And somebody who's comfortable in those woods, you take that time. Now, I don't think the crimes took as long as maybe some people think. I think you probably, if you're diligent, you probably accomplish this 15, 20, 25 minutes, maybe. Let's say 15 at the minimum. And that's 15 minutes. You've got a crime scene of 3 victims that you've brutally murdered that you got to clean up. Parents are starting to look. People are probably calling their names. This is somebody extremely comfortable being in those woods. They know the area. They've probably been in there a lot, and they probably live right there.
And along those lines, with the woods being kind of, we've said this before, the woods is like a character in this entire story, right? A very important one. But the interesting thing is, if they knew this area, and I agree with you, I think they did, they would also know that this piece of water that they're hiding the crime scene in will dry up. So it's not a forever thing. But we've also heard the theory, of course, of a truck driver. You would think that if you either knew the woods or wanted to secrete these kids long term, you would try to remove them from the area. You can't do 3 boys and bikes without some sort of vehicle. So if you don't have vehicles, you certainly can't do this. So the best thing you can do maybe is just to hide them there, but that you would even know it's a temporary solution. So these things are, I don't have an answer to that. It's just, I agree with you, but then it's also like the person who has knowledge of this area also has knowledge that this creek is not a permanent creek. It's going to dry up relatively soon.
Yeah, but they have no other choice. They
Correct.
may know that, and their point is to delay it as long as they can. And then the one thing about it being a truck driver, the bikes are parked right there. This is somebody who entered that way or came out that way. So if you're coming from the other side, you're not going to have seen the bikes. They didn't come from that side.
Yeah.
They came from that neighborhood. Whether the killer, in my opinion, the killer came through that. And I know the three don't live in the neighborhood, but if I was, as Brett said, if I'm walking into this, I'm like, neighborhood canvas right now, it's somebody right here in this neighborhood who lives in this neighborhood.
Mhm.
So let's identify every single person. Let's get an alibi for every single person, and starting very close to the edge of the woods and moving your way out. Also family members, of course. So that's where I would start. But I think the person entered the woods and maybe, they entered the woods, threw the bikes in, knew what they were going to do, encountered the boys. I don't think that's necessarily what happened, but I think they saw them go in there, likely followed them in, threw the bikes in, went and did what they were going to do, and then came back out.
So one thing you noted that I think is very interesting, because obviously Mr. Bojangles man is also a character in a lot of people's mind of an alternative suspect. And from the little we know of him, because he was not interviewed, is there seemed to at least be some sort of delusional aspect or something was happening there. And you noted that whatever happened, if it was a blitz attack and it wasn't planned, the killer or killers was able to gather themselves and act rationally. And you were shy of using the word sophistication, but with the crime scene as you see and the way that it was covered up and the mental kind of acuity needed to execute it, is there an age in mind in which you said, there's no way a child, what's a child? An 8-year-old could do this, a 10-year-old, a 12. Is there anything like that in terms of your profile of who we're looking at? Someone who's much older, or could it be anywhere along the spectrum in terms of age, maturity, who could carry out something like this?
I would say age is so complicated because I know you've talked about John Douglas, and he's absolutely right when you say you have chronological age, you have emotional age. I agree with John Douglas. This is probably somebody older. That's would be my initial assessment, because I do not believe they were mutilated by the killer. I think they were bludgeoned, but I think the majority of the injuries came from animals and aquatic life. And so you have someone extremely comfortable with violence, has engaged in violence before, has the wherewithal to know, I need to take their clothes off. I need to tie them up. I need to make sure they stay underwater for a period of time. I need to make sure their clothes stay underwater for a period of time so that I can keep people away from here, keep people away from putting two and two together that I was out here or that I was, with the boys or the last scene with the boys. I need to put time and distance as far as possible. Again, I don't want to say too sophisticated, because people start to say sophisticated and you think, oh, they're just, la-di-da. That's not the kind of sophistication that I mean. So it's like somebody with a pipe and a bourbon sophistication, not that kind. But this person was thinking on their feet after engaging in just the brutality, and then this is what I got to do. And they do it quickly, and they do it well. That is there's sophistication. There's a maturity to that. That's my assessment. I think it was misread early on because of not having seen this kind of a case before. And so, they may have just missed some things. The one thing I don't think I never believed that it was a satanic ritual. That's just not what happened. Whether we, debate injuries being caused by animals or knives, this is not a satanic ritual. This is most likely a personal cause. Homicide, it could be sexually motivated as well. It's one of those two, but it's not satanic.
I have 3 questions. So the first one, you talk about age. So when we talked about John Douglas's profile, Damien fits it so perfectly, except for age. Age is the one place where, he's got the violent history, he's got the broken home, he's got the mental problems, he's got the reputation, he's got all that stuff. But age is a problem. He was 18 years old. But how strongly is that? Like, is it?
It's
there's
not.
no
I would
way-
never, yeah, I would never say it's not him because he's 18. That's too young. I would never say that. A profile is just an assessment. I would never testify to that, right? You don't testify to profiles. It's a way to help focus investigators. This is what you're looking for. That is it, really. So I would never say it can't be somebody who's 18 years old. I would never say it couldn't be someone who's 15. What you're dealing with, though, is you are dealing with somebody who can engage in something, and this doesn't bother them. Going back to Terry, if, Terry did this, he's not going to grief counseling. Like, he wouldn't, there's no grief in this offender. None. I don't see. The only concern this offender likely has is that he would get caught, not that he feels bad. You don't do that to 3 8-year-old boys and have a conscience.
So not having grief, continuing this profile, would you expect the person or the perpetrator to be someone who would continue to be violent, whether caught or not? Or would they, if they were caught, would they have the self-control, I guess, to not demonstrate any violent tendencies after that? Or is this a one-time thing, in other words, or is this a pattern that you would expect to see this perpetrator have?
I would expect to see further violence in either their criminal history or their personal history. And what I mean is, like, they could do something and they just don't get arrested for it. I would expect to see that. Now, there are always cases where I just did a show on DNA ID, and we did one and done cases where you see, and these were more sexually motivated homicides, but you see very deviant behavior. You see it one time, and then years later, DNA solves the case and the person never did anything again, at least not criminally. But then you look at their past and their personal history and you see, okay, there were things they did. But yes, I would expect to see that this person acted out violently, because whatever they did, they felt they had the right to do this. There's no guilt associated with this.
So I want to ask you about Mr. Bojangles. So is the kind of person who would do this also the kind of person who would stumble into a woman's bathroom covered in mud and blood, collapse on the toilet, and then stumble off into the darkness? Because that's always been the thing about Mr. Bojangles. Yeah. Like, did you really just commit these 3 crimes in the sophisticated way you're describing and then do that? What do you think about that?
It's such a odd thing to happen that I would say he probably did do it. But because, to have that happen right at the time you've had this brutal murder, I would say throw the profile out the window. This guy, go get his blood. This guy probably did it. I'm wrong. But yeah, that would be surprising to me. This was a person who was thinking pretty carefully and probably ended up somewhere where he could be alone, clean up. And maybe that was the women's bathroom. That's very possible. But I just don't think that this person, with the amount of effort they went to hide the bodies, would just go into a public rest area and clean up like that. But if he did, he got away with it. So that was pretty smart.
And then, like I said, I won't keep you forever. But going back to John Douglas and his profile, he talks about personal cause homicide. And I think a lot of people, they hear that and they think, oh, so it has to be someone who's related to the victim or knows the victim. Is that an accurate definition of that?
But that's some people's definition. And kind of like, I think old school thinking is there's a personal relationship there and something goes wrong, and either out of anger or revenge, maybe another motive, eliminate obstacle of some sort, one person kills another. That would be kind of old school thought about personal cause homicide. Now, I don't think there necessarily has to be a personal relationship prior to the murder. It could be you have an argument with somebody, you kill them, and out of anger, and that's personal cause, in my opinion. Really, personal cause is kind of a catch-all when it's not sexually motivated and when there's not a financial motivation. So you go personal cause, and that kind of catches everything else. Now, with this case, in my opinion, it's either personal cause or sexually motivated. I don't think it's sexually motivated because you have the extreme injuries to the back of the head, but it's hard to tell because they were put in water. We don't know if, instead of being sexually motivated, what I think if there is a sexual component, which I don't rule out because they obviously were found unclothed, but it could be what we would call a rape murder, where the whole point isn't to kill them. A sexually motivated homicide is something, the point is to ultimately kill. And that's the ultimate gratification, where you have rape murder, where it's not ultimately to kill, but you are covering up the fact that you've sexually assaulted somebody. So you murder them. That is a rape murder. And that you have to distinguish the two of them. Sometimes they're very difficult to distinguish. So this could be the fact somebody was sexually assaulted, and to cover that up, witness elimination, destroy evidence, whatever, then they're murdered. That would be considered a rape murder. So I think I'm going to distinguish that. I think this is either a personal cause or possibly a rape murder.
So it's not Mr. Bojangles. It's not the West Memphis 3. It's not Terry Hobbs, and it's not John Mark Byers, and it's not a trucker. Who did it? You reveal it to the world.
I don't rule out any of them, really. I would say I would probably deprioritize Terry Hobbs. Bojangles, that's tough to get around. It's tough when you have muddy and blood in that. So that one's hard for me to get around. With the West Memphis 3, I don't think it was 3 people. I think I'm going to defer to statistics, stick right now, today, on this date, I'm going to stick with, I think it's a single offender. But if I really had to go back that day, I would really focus on the surrounding neighborhood, the apartments, and any homes that viewed the woods. That's what I would do. That would how I'd be prioritizing things. Prioritize that, prioritize parents, and kind of expand out from there. Prioritize, okay, who's in these woods? Who walks through these woods? Those are kind of you start close by and you move your way out. So probably should put family first and then go to the neighborhood. But in this case, I would be like, let's go look around this neighborhood based on the situation here. These little boys were out riding their bikes. Parents were out looking for them. Let's look at the neighbors here.
So that's really helpful in terms of what you would have focused on for the investigation. As we've talked about, a lot of what you would have looked at immediately is probably now lost forever. Anything's possible, but that type of memory has probably slipped most people's minds. So with the case record that we have, the evidence that we have, the faulty memories now that we have many, many years later, is there a possibility of finding out more truth of that night, whether it was the 3 who were convicted who did it or that they didn't do it? Is there hope for knowing what it is? And obviously one thing that a lot of people have been talking about is just test the DNA. As we know, DNA is not always the kind of silver bullet or whatever to get you. It can rule things out. It can rule things in, but oftentimes it is not exactly the silver bullet people want it to be. So do you think there are certain things that are still knowable that can help us get closer to understanding if the convicted are the right people or the wrong people or whoever did this?
I think there's always a possibility. I mean, some people believe they know the answer. I mean, you had 3 people convicted of it and they took an Alford plea. So, but with the DNA, let's talk about that really quick, because if you have a family member's DNA on them, that doesn't tell you that they killed them unless the source is something like semen. Then and even that I've seen, we covered a case on our show. Oh my gosh. So even that wouldn't say definitively, but something like that would be a little more suspicious. But family DNA, a hair or something, as I know, Terry Hobbs' hair might possibly be there. That does not give you the answer. I do think if one of the 3, Jesse, Damien, or Jason's DNA were on there, that would be compelling to me. That would answer the questions. Were they involved, or were one of them involved, or all 3 of them involved? But at least if they had one, then that would answer the question, because their DNA should not be on them. Or if you had other DNA from, let's say, somebody who lived in the Mayfair apartments, then that's questionable. Like, okay, why is that there? And what's the source of it? So yeah, I think there could be some answers with the DNA, but I don't think we can hold our breath and be certain. But I would think that there would be, at least at this point, I don't know how the evidence has been preserved, but tying up using those shoelaces, that's a lot of friction there. So there is very likely DNA skin cells from the friction of tying and pulling the shoelaces out. There's a lot of friction, taking the clothes off the kids. That's always pot. Now, of course, it was in the water. So, and how it's been stored, we don't know, but those would be good sources to test.
Well, I think that's going to happen. So at least it looks like it.
I hope so. I hope so. And I hope, it gives the answers. Now, if you have a parent's DNA, like on more than one shoelace, then that becomes a little more compelling. But like one hair that's tied up, that to me, it certainly doesn't prove anything.
Yeah. Well, look, we've been here for an hour and a half. And once again, we started this off talking about how generous you are with your time. And you have proven it once again. And I think this should be obvious, but I'll say it anyway. If you're not listening to the consult, you need to. They just did something on Brian Koberger. If you're curious about what was going through his mind, I think you're much more likely to know it from what Julia says than any future interviews he does. So you guys need to be checking
I would
this
agree
out.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't ever see somebody like that just really telling the truth about who he is. He's too arrogant to do that.
Right.
So we'll do it for him.
Yeah, there you go.
We'll tell you who he is.
y'all need to be listening. This is honestly the worst part about the West Memphis 3 is I feel like people used to think we were one of the best podcasts, but then we put Joseph Scott Morgan on and then we put Julia on and everybody's like, why are we listening to these jokers? We just need to listen to
We're
them.
trying to get us out of our own job. That's the whole point.
Oh, you guys, you do. I think you do a great job. The reason I ever reached out to you, Brett, was because you were knocking behavioral analysis. I'm like, that's what you do. You and Alice do that. It's like.
In my defense, I never knocked it.
He's like, yeah, he was. And I on a whim, I just sent a message together. He'll probably just, he'll never answer back.
Here we are.
Like, why don't you come on the show and tell me about it? But I think you guys do a fantastic job, and I love your legal analysis. And that's just an area that I don't know very well. I kind of know the law, just as an FBI agent, you kind of have to know some of it. But I love your show. But I do have to say, your show with Joseph Scott Morgan, I just loved it. And I think I was telling you before we recorded Cheryl Mack McCollum and Joseph Scott Morgan, two podcasters that go way back in their experience in forensics, and they're like of my vintage. And I feel a real kinship with them because they started a little bit before I did, but it's like they're like old school, and they know where we started and how far we've come. And I love listening to both of them and their knowledge in forensics. And the one thing Joseph Scott Morgan said, which really resonated with me, is like, this is 93. We knew what we were doing. We knew how to process crime scenes. He's absolutely right. When I started, we knew how to do scenes the right way. So to say, oh, it's 93 or, oh, it's like the late 80s, there was really no excuse for not processing a crime scene well, even back then. I mean, obviously technology has advanced, but the rules still were in place back then of what to do and what not to do. So when I see high profile cases now where mistakes are made, it's just like, why are we still doing this? We all know better. But anyway, I loved that show too. But I love you guys. So.
Wow. You are welcome on the show anytime. I think the number of people who were going crazy and so excited to hear tonight's episode, it was so informative. Julia, thank you for giving us your time and also your expertise. I think it's incredibly valuable, not just for diving into an old case, but truly informing people about how investigations are run, how you do conduct these interviews, and what we should be looking for.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for asking me to participate. It was an honor, really. Thank you.
Well, it's not the first time and it won't be the last. I can guarantee that. All right. Well, I know you guys enjoyed this. You probably have thoughts. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Join the gallery. Join Unsubs, which is the Consult's Facebook page, if you want to discuss the cases that are going on there. And definitely give the Consult a listen if you haven't already. Well, we are, I think, based on when this is going to come out, next week we're doing theories. So if you want to know what we think, you're going to find out in a week. So I hope you're all looking forward to that. I'm Still trying to figure out what I'm going to say.
I was going to say, I'm going to have to figure out what I think.
Changes after every episode.
Oh,
Okay.
I was going to say, have you done, because I'm not caught up. Have you done your theories episode?
We have not.
No.
We have not. And I will tell you,
Yeah.
your episode, us talking right now, has changed my mind multiple times throughout the hour and a half conversation.
Yeah. It's the same. So I don't know.
It's a-
Seems like it happens every time.
It's a thing.
case.
Really?
It's not easy. It's not easy. I have had cases where I'm like, did I get that right? And I talk with my colleagues and other people, and it's hard. It's really hard. There's a reason why this case has been so controversial.
Yeah. Well, when we say it's Israel Keys, I don't want you to be mad.
It's not. No,
We'll
no.
lose all credibility.
Oh, the evil genius.
But was he in Arkansas in
Yeah.
1993?
Yeah.
Who knows? Who
The
knows?
one thing I will say with certainty is that this was not a satanic ritual. I will say that 100% was not. So let's throw
I
that
agree
out
with you on
there.
that as well.
Okay, good.
Agree with you on that as well. So don't worry. We will
You
not be
won't-
coming down on the
The satanic side. We've yet
Ritual.
to. Not with Delphi, not with.
That's going to be,
That's going to be a
other
theme.
than the,
It was
Mayumbe
it was
case.
aliens. It wasn't a satanic ritual.
Oh.
That's the new shirt.
might have been dogs, but not
Oh,
a satanic ritual.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again so much. We will be back next week with what may very well be the conclusion of our coverage of the West Memphis 3. But until then, I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
And I'm Julia.
and we are the Prosecutors.
The reason that happened, that I had to cancel, was this marks the 1 week point where our air conditioning has been out and it's been 100 degrees.
Your
Your
air
air conditioning
conditioning's
is
been
still
out.
out?
Oh,
So
my
I
Lord.
think Brittany was throwing up because she got herself so worked up because it was
Oh,
so
God.
hot. But we didn't know it was breaking that night. So I didn't put 2 and 2 together.
Wow.
And then that night when I went up to clean up her throw up, I was like, oh my gosh, the air conditioning's not working. So it's supposed to come on Wednesday. The problem is when it's 100 degrees, everyone's air conditioning breaks at the same time.
Mhm.
True.
So I'm so sorry. You guys are
Yeah.
catching us halfway, but we were supposed to do this a week ago.
I'm so sorry.
No,
I had done it before.
No, it wasn't a big deal.
It before on your show, so I
You should
thought I was-
always do it.
Oh no,
You
I
should.
I'm just
always
pointing
do.
out that the reason was not, it wasn't that I didn't want you in there. It was,
Oh no, I just thought. Oh, I misunderstood.
Nope. You
So,
never
it's
misunderstood.
embarrassing.
You have a permanent slot in our sign off.
Hi, I'm Jessie Prey.
And I'm Andy Cassette. Welcome to Love Murder, where we unravel the darkest tales of romance turned deadly.
Our episodes are long form, narrative driven, and deeply researched, perfect for the true crime aficionados seeking stories beyond the headlines.
like the chilling case of Blanche Taylor Moore, the so-called Black Widow who left a trail of poisoned lovers.
Or the shocking murders of Chad Shelton and Dwayne Johnson, where family ties masked a sinister plot.
Subscribe to Love Murder on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.